this is one of the things that you and I have been discussing over the last few days, is how easy it is to forget the humanity of people on other sides of any of these arguments. It's one of the things that happened in the US with Trump, that Republicans started to hate Democrats and vice versa. And so I listened to there's a very good podcast that Andrew Sullivan has called Dishcast, and he was talking to an old anchorman who was saying that one of the things that went wrong in US politics was that in the age of Newt Gingrich, they started to have cameras in Congress, and the politicians started to play to the cameras instead of looking each other in the eye across the benches. And once they no longer saw each other as humans and no longer had to look each other in the eye, it was much easier to demonize each other. And so I think one of the great challenges for all of us on both sides, on every side of these debates, whether it's Gaza, Ukraine, Trump, abortion, guns, any of these things, is somehow to yank ourselves back, to remind ourselves of the humanity of the people on the other side, whatever we think of them, however misguided we think they are, and they think we're misguided too, not to forget their humanity. So that's one thing that's a real challenge for me, because in my anger and my pain, or my distress or my anxiety about politics or geopolitics or any other thing, it's very easy for me to kind of batten down the hatches and just sort of retreat into my own sense of dogma and prejudice. I think that's key. The other thing you and I discussed that I thought was very interesting was an insight from David Brooks that actually also came from a discussion that David Brooks had on the Dishcast podcast with Andrew Sullivan, which is David Brooks is this great New York Times columnist and writer, said, you want to ask people what experience led you to have these beliefs. And this is something you and I discussed yesterday, that there's something so powerful about that ability to kind of gently open yourself up to the experience of the other person. Can you talk about that? Because it seems to be a really valuable insight.
The first place I want to go briefly is this idea of seeing somebody else's pain and the inability to see somebody else's pain. And, I go back to an early therapy session with Laurie, with my then Jungian psychotherapist called Soren Ekstrom, God bless his soul. I haven't had any contact with him since I stopped being his client / subject, but really incredible guy. And Laurie came to him. We were in the midst of a big fight, and so, I had to be quiet while Laurie laid it out from her side, and then she had to be quiet while I laid it out from my side, and I was full of anger. And he turned to Laurie, he said, "Do you see how much pain he's in?" I was full of anger. And it was just a moment. And I don't think that Laurie saw at that moment how much pain I was in, and she may not have seen it for the rest of the therapy session, but just those words over time sank in. And so I find myself really wanting to get some kind of anchor who will sit with some of the people who are representing the Palestinian case, I think, awfully, and say, wow, you guys are in a lot of pain. You're in a lot of pain. I'm sorry, William, because I wanted to say that, but I've not really addressed the question. So please bring me back to the question.
Well, it's important. We were talking about this idea from David Brooks, this idea of asking what experience led the person to think what they think. Because at the moment, part of what's happening, this gets at Charlie Munger, right? Charlie Munger would talk about how people just want to go back into their echo chamber and get into what he would call heavy ideology. He talked about Buffett's father having heavy ideology. Yeah. And so in a way, what we're talking about is how to operate in a way where you're not just reinforcing your own heavy ideology and biases, but opening yourself up to other people's perspectives. And I mean, one of the things that Munger would do in practical terms is, as a Republican, he would read articles by people like Paul Krugman, who he disagreed with a great deal. But he's like, this is one really smart Democrat. Yeah. And he wanted to engage with his views. So he was very consciously engaging with the other side. And as a result, he was a free enough thinker that he could say, well, so he was a Republican who ended up voting for Hillary Clinton. And this is not a political debate. What we're really talking about is the ability to open yourself up to the opposing view, whatever side you're coming from. That's what I'm really trying to get at, is how we do that.
And yeah, so where do I go first? Something that's sort of like, in a way, it's just a problem in with media and social media and the way communication works is that it really upsets me that some of these people are reasonable people with whom one can compromise, who can see the other side and understand the other's narrative. But they know that in order to get elected or in order to win their supporters over, they have to say things that they know are not true or leave half of the truth out, because that's how you win in the political game. And I think that that's kind of like just distressing to me, and I don't know what the answer is. When it comes to Swiss political culture, and I really, I think, I don't know how you construct this, and this came up, and you brought it up to me in the Jim O'Shaughnessy podcast, that, how do you get to a place where what is truly respected in society is the person who can best represent the middle ground? What is truly respected is the person who can best demonstrate to an audience that they understand the opposing side's position, and to really go into it in depth, which is kind of like this healing process that we're talking about. And I don't think that I've spent enough time studying or experiencing politics. I just like am a kibitzer from the side. But there are people on the Israeli side who seek to understand, say, the Palestinian narrative. And I say Palestinian narrative because there's no point getting into facts. This is a narrative. And what they try and do, and I'm thinking specifically of a woman called Einat Wilf, who was introduced to me by Hillel Neuer. And she has worked hard, as I believe did Amos Oz, and is to say to Israelis, look, this country was created in the wake of the Holocaust. There was much violence that was done to Jews because they didn't have a state. And that feels really good. And we have a history that we tell ourselves. But in order for us to make peace, real, true, and lasting peace with this set of people who are also occupying the land, I know that we want to either ignore their narrative or we want to pick holes in their narrative and show that it doesn't correspond to historical fact. But one way or another, the only way we're going to get to a true resolution of our differences with the population that inhabits more or less the same space is to engage with their narrative in a real way, and to at least, even if you disagree with it, because we'll always disagree with it, express empathy. Now, what happens to an Amos Oz in that kind of situation is that he could do that because he was an author, because he would never have gotten elected by writing and saying things like that. And Amos Oz is a very famous, well-known Israeli author who's no longer around, but his daughter is Fania Oz is her name. And similarly, Einat Wilf, I mean, amazing woman who's a member of the Knesset, might have been Israel's nomination for its representative in the United Nations, who sat with me. She's part French, so her mother's French. She sat with me in the south of France in the one time that we were lucky. I was lucky, twice I've met her. And she had to make the decision between telling, I mean, this is kind of like nothing profound, telling lies to get elected or being intellectually honest. And she decided that she wanted to be intellectually honest. And I think that what is deeply disappointing to me about the person it seems that Benjamin Netanyahu has evolved into is that he has become utterly fine with telling lies, it seems to me, in order to be politically expedient. And he's a different person now to the person he was, flawed as he was at the very beginning of his career, where I felt like what he was talking about was in some way rooted in realities. And he's very, very capable of talking to a specific portion of Israeli society in ways that are just not helpful and productive. But
I mean, in a way, I don't even really want to get into the specifics of politics like that. I think it's more what I'm getting at is politicians are playing a particular game, as you point out, which makes it hard for them to be honest and makes it very tempting for them to exploit division and exacerbate division. I think what we're trying to, and we can move on from this subject in a second, but I think what you and I are groping towards is what a lot of our friends and peers are groping towards, which is to try to get to a place where we're not boxing ourselves into narrow ideologies and anger and hatred, but we're like, it's more that action of you hugging Aziz and looking at each other with love and openness to learn from people with different experiences, rather than coming at it thinking, I'm right, you guys don't understand me, and I'm under threat. And I feel like you and I have both made our mistakes on this front. We don't really know how to engage on this front. But that's what we're sort of working at. And the more all of us can work towards that, I think that's it's an incredible challenge over the next few years, because these divisions are not going away in all of these different areas.
I mean, I just want to bring it back to the personal, because that's where I feel like I have the best experiences. I can trust my experiences, and it's empirical data that I feel I can share without kind of fluffing around and things that I don't really know a lot about. So I come back to my experiences in my most important relationship with Laurie, my wife, and I don't know if I've told you this story. It was kind of utterly miraculous for me when it happened. And I think that my personal experience, what you're asking for is how do we translate that into the political realm? And I don't know how to translate it, but I feel like talking about my personal experience and expressing the hope that it can be translated, I do believe it can be. So I'll just take you through the sort of miracle, really. I felt it was miraculous. So it's early on in our relationship. We have no children, but I believe that Laurie's pregnant. We've had this incredible marriage, and it was a fantastic celebration, and now it's probably sort of February, and Laurie's now pregnant, and it's a dark winter in New York City, and I've had a lousy day at the office. And Laurie, who came to the US with her largest friend base in Mexico, kind of alone and lonely, but I walk in through the door and do what I would often do, which is I had a lousy day, walk straight through to the TV room, flip on the TV and zone out the way I think many men do at the time. That was a way to zone out. And Laurie comes into the room and she's beside herself. She's like, you don't love me, and you didn't even say hello to me. I probably sort of like humped, like did a grunt as I walked through the door, acknowledged her in a very basic way. And what comes up for me is like, you screaming, yelling, ungrateful B word. Here I am battling the world all day, had a lousy day. Yeah, you've had nothing to do. You've been hanging out, spending my money, and like all you got to do is like maybe make some freaking food for me at the end of the day. And all I want to do is watch television, and you are going to come and give me grief? So this is what I want to say to her. It's on the tip of my tongue. I'm like, F you, get out of my face and leave me the hell alone. And instead, by some miracle, I remember some of the marital counseling sessions, and literally, William, I really am, I say it through gritted teeth. I don't believe what I'm saying. I don't own what I'm saying, but I say, so what you're telling me is that when I walked through the door and I walked past, you felt like I had ignored you, and even in saying that in that way, in that kind of tense-like way, I want to say, and I did say hello to you, and I didn't have to go long into it. And she's full of rage and anger, and she bursts into tears, and she says, yes. And I felt so unloved, and it's been so difficult for me. And and in that moment, I'm tearing up right now. Yeah. Everything changed inside me. That was a miracle. And I was like, it was like, holy moly. And we've been through many of those things, but how, through gritted teeth, William. I was trying in the most minimal way. So that is the transformation that is capable of happening in a relationship. And that is what needs to happen in the Middle East, for example. And how we get there, I don't know.
Yeah, but I think it has to start with a willingness to a willingness to see the other person's experience and their humanity, and to get over our own narrow prejudices. So I don't know. I hope it's helpful for me to think this through, because I mess it up the whole time. I wanted to switch.
Yeah, thank you for giving the space to that. I think that this is even more authentic to me, because it's been deeply distressing to watch this. It's been deeply distressing in all sorts of different ways, and I feel like at least we're honoring the people who are in distress right now. And I specifically, forgive me, William, I walk around every day caring about these people who are underground. They've been held hostage now. Kfir Bibas is more than 1 year old. He's spent about a third to, it's going to come up for more than a third of his life as a hostage. No child should ever have to do that. And while I'm saying that, and I've posted this on Twitter, there are from time to time photographs of injured Gazan children. And what I want to say is that no child should have to deal with that. And that is also deeply wrong. And
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a very important subject. We talked before about this idea of this long-term compounding journey, and one of the things you and I have discussed is you're 26 years into this, and we sometimes talk about, okay, so a couple of years ago we would say, so let's say you're halfway through this journey, and now we're starting to think, well, okay, so you're about to turn 58, I think, in a couple of days.
That's true. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah.
I was really holding on to that 57, nice prime number in the second digit.
And so I was sort of saying to you the other day, well, wait a second. So let's say you do the fund for another 10, 12, 15 years. It's probably not halfway through anymore. I mean, we figured out the other day that if you continue to compound at 9% a year, which doesn't sound that fantastic, that original $14 million in the fund becomes over $1 billion. That's how extraordinary it is. If you continue to compound over half a century, 9% would turn that original stake into $1 billion. So it's an enormous number. But you and I were sort of discussing, like, what's the point in it all anyway? And you were talking about, well, so as I look to the future, what am I really aiming for? What does a meaningful and beautiful life actually look like? And what part in that is to do with money and continuing to compound, and what part is developing these other areas of life? And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about how your views have evolved on this question of what actually creating a meaningful life, an increasingly meaningful and beautiful life, actually looks like for you.
And it's something that, thank you, and something that I've struggled with, because it's not clear to me. So I think that when you have an immigrant's mindset, doesn't mean necessarily you're a first generation immigrant, might be just, but the immigrant mindset is, first of all, to acquire security. And I don't think that non-immigrants can fully understand the sense of unease and I guess it's the sense of unease of being in a society where you don't fully know your way. And I would say with the UK, my family, starting with my mother and father who immigrated to the UK when I was 11 years old, I would argue that we're still on a journey of understanding what the United Kingdom is really about. It's a particularly complex, I think, society with a very, very complex social system. And I'm on a learning curve that I'm still going through and getting to. And I think that many immigrants understandably lunge for financial security. That is why in many countries, immigrant populations, there are many very successful entrepreneurs amongst immigrant populations, because that is the source of security. And I think that when I look back, that is a part of what's motivated me to be doing what I'm doing. And we've talked, and I think I've written in my annual letters about that, often the kind of that sense of security or not goes back generations. So in my case, I think there's a particular break in the 1930s when any family wealth that my family had in Germany was completely destroyed, and there was kind of starting again. And what's fascinating about this is that I think that we need to be aware of it because it influences us whether we like it or not. And it's not like my father or my grandparents or relatives ever sat down with me and told me that story, but we grow up living with it. And so it is worthwhile to make it explicit. The place where I struggle is that, and I've said this to you, it seems to me to be asinine is the word that I want to use, but we're in front of a guy who has read many more words of English, and maybe we'll get on to Proust at some point.
That would be Charlie Munger's words, asinine.
Yes, it is, and I'm kind of using it to reference him.
Yeah.
But actually, before I go there, do you mind, William, what does asinine really mean?
Well, it's in the same genre of words like puerile, stupid, naive. So asinine, it's kind of dumb. It's a fancy word for saying it would be dumb and puerile and idiotic.
And I think that what's my point is that I'm using the word just because Charlie Munger's used it. And actually, I think the better word for me to use is shallow.
Yeah,
it doesn't.
He would say asininities and inanities.
Right, but it's shallow because what are you actually trying to optimize for? And William, I think you worked out that we have less than 10,000 hours based on life expectancy.
Yeah, this is based on my conversation with Chris Davis. He said once you hit about 54, you're into the third set of 10,000 days. Yeah, and days. So given that we're into what maybe, it takes into our early 80s. So let's say another 10,000 productive days that I have as a 55-year-old and you as a soon-to-be 58-year-old.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Chris's point was if you apply Munger's inversion technique, you want to say, well, what could mess up these last 10,000 days, and let me not do that.
In any case, absolutely. And over and above that, what is really the limited resource is what is every moment of our lives filled with, and what do we want it to be filled with? And and it's come up for me many times, is the moment. So if you're Warren Buffett, to whom you could have asked the same question, his answer, I believe, would be, but I just really, really like looking at companies, and I really, really like continuing to work on this work of art that is Berkshire Hathaway, Museum of Modern Business. And I've tried reading, I could imagine Warren saying, I've tried reading Proust, and it really left me stone cold, and what I really enjoy doing. So and I remember that moment when I realized that what really made Warren so remarkable for me was that he wasn't trying to be that person who's utterly fascinated with examining businesses all day long. He is that person. And he's tried being a different person, and he isn't. And then I go to some point at one of the Wesco meetings where Charlie's asked what novels he's read. And he said that he doesn't read much in the fiction world anymore, and that irked me. And I realized that I did not want to go through the rest of my life having not read all sorts of works of fiction, including the world's great classics, just because I think that, and I actually think that later, so it's only in the last decade that I read David Copperfield and War and Peace and The Magic Mountain, and I think I'm a wiser, better person for it. So for me, those last 10,000 hours, I believe it's more meaningful for me to spend at least some part of that time exposing myself to some of those great minds of literature. And and it's fascinating for me that, what I've not been able to do is to pick a particular author. And I think it's really beautiful. And I'm fascinated that you seem to have picked Proust, all 1.5 million words of In Search of Lost Time that you've chosen to spend time with. So what I struggle with is that in a certain way, up to now, I set up my life with the goal of creating this financial security for myself and my investors. In a certain way, I've achieved that for the people who've been with me, at least some of the people who've been with me from the beginning, including my father and my own family. And I haven't really figured out the right way to structure my life going forwards. And I know that the right answer for me is not to say, because I do love the investing side of things, and I don't want to clean that off the table, but it's creating the space for the other things for a balanced, enriched life. And for me, that involves reading and learning and developing. And then just forgive me, going back to this financial security, and I go back to a talk that was given, and then I'll hand the mic over to you to see where you go. Where this, I think his name is Collier. I wish I would remember his first name. 5-year reunion for business school, where he talks to us and he says, as the years go on, many of you will not return to your reunions. And the reason you don't return, he said, he was talking from experience, from analysis of business school reunions. He said, it's not going to be your health. It's not going to be your wealth. It's going to be because you messed up some important relationships in your life, quite probably the relationship with your spouse. He addressed us as a group and he said, don't worry about your finances. You're graduates of Harvard Business School. You're going to do great. You're going to do far better than the vast majority of the American population. Worry about the non-financial side of your balance sheet. And I urge you to invest in that. And so that I really took that to heart. And so why would I continue to think about only getting wealthier in a financial sense if I'm not investing in the non-financial side of my balance sheet? My family relationships, my psychological health, all of those things. What I would tell you is that having thought about that for the last couple of decades, one of the things that's been disappointing and hard for me to understand is that, you know, we can do as much as we can with our own children. And even then, I mean, I've got teenage children. You were very soothing to me. I mean, the outcomes are often different to what we hoped for and expect. And part of wisdom is learning to adjust to that. And when it goes beyond immediate family, you can invest as much as you like, but the world has a way of taking over. So the answer is also not to just invest in the non-financial side of one's balance sheet or of one's assets. But so I'm looking to kind of balance that out. And I don't think I've done a particularly good job. And it's also, there's a kind of a sense of, sort of like I feel conflicted because, I mean, one of the first things I said to you when you came was like, you know, William, I feel bad because I'm putting out not an Omaha number and you're an investor with me. I have to be honest about what's going on. I am interested in these other things. So that's kind of hard for me, and I have to find a way to navigate my way through that. And what I was committed to doing, and I wrote it somewhere, so I delivered to William a whole bunch of things, is that I'm determined to be honest about this process and not to try and cover up something which it would be very expedient to do. But ultimately, that will lead to a more diminished life.